I'm Dmitry Sitkovetsky, violinist and conductor. You're listening to Keeping the Flame, a series about the way one's life was shaped by family, political system, and great art, but not defined by any of them. And this chapter is about the experiences that created my strange mixed identity: refugee, Soviet, immigrant, Westerner. When New York Philharmonic came to perform in Russia in '76, I went to the rehearsal with a special mission from my guru, Iosif Andriasov. I was to pick the most trusting victim, in a way, who I would approach in order to take a letter that he would later, arriving in New York, would send to Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And so while watching the rehearsal, I picked the cellist, as it turned out, Jerry Grossman, and I brought him a lovely present, an LP of Mstislav Rostropovich and Sviatoslav Richter playing together. Inside of the LP jacket, I put that letter. Jerry, the cellist who I approached, he took it, he was very nice. But what I didn't know, which I found out the following year or year and a half later, he talked to a CIA guy who was with them. So the CIA guy said, listen, it's up to you. I'm not telling you not to do it. Just do it quietly if you see his eyes and you trust him. And so sure enough, he took the risk. He took that letter, enjoyed obviously LP, which was great. And then he sent me a postcard. And so that was my proof to my guru that I did indeed do it. And there was, of course, no follow-up. So Jerry thought he would never see me again. How incredibly surprised he was when all of a sudden in November '77, I find him, I call him up, said, Jerry, I invite you to a concert at Alice Talley Hall. I'm playing on the 11th of November, which was exactly 2 months after I arrived. Please come over. He couldn't believe it. I wanted to come to live in New York. I didn't come there just to, conquer the West and start playing concerts. And like some of my more famous at the beginning colleagues, especially the ones who defected, they immediately started playing and they became the musical tourists. So they tour all the time, they see some things, more curious would go to some museums, but others just see nothing but hotels, concert halls, and restaurants. I came to live. I really wanted to start a whole new life, to get to know the new mentality, the new values. And what better way to start a new life but to go and study. And I couldn't have picked probably a better place. Juilliard School looked very much like United Nations. So that was already a cultural awakening, if you like, because there were so many, from Japan, from Korea, from China. There were people from all over the United States, which is a big country. As one of my Juilliard friends later on said, well, Dima and I, we immigrated to New York the same week. He came from Soviet Union. I came from Minnesota. So, anybody, even from New Jersey, if you come to New York City, it's like going to a different planet. And for me, the most time I spent inside of the school was not so much my own sort of lectures. I remember coming to my first theory lesson. When I took the exam, theory was only difficult for me that I didn't know the terms in English. So I came to my first, as it turned out, first and last lesson of that harmony course. I saw what they were doing, 2 bars at the time, most primitive, dictation, and those students, they were struggling. So I started making fun of them. I mean, of course, what are you doing? I mean, this is silly. I did it in the third grade and better than you. So the teacher waited till the end of the class, summoned me, said, listen, I don't want to see you ever again in this class. You finished this course. Goodbye. The great thing about Juilliard and the difference between Juilliard and Moscow Conservatory, that it was not just a music school. It had fantastic ballet school, and it had fantastic theater department. Every other day, there would be another play, Shakespeare plays, which I saw so many, where I would go, and it cost nothing. And I spent a lot of time at the Lincoln Center Library and playing a lot of chamber music. That was a big thing for me. We all used to just gather in somebody's apartment late at night and play whatever we could get our hands on till 3 a.m, just on beer and pizza. And those are wonderful memories, because in Moscow, we just didn't do that much chamber music in those days. So anyway, many firsts were there. My first car. I bought my first car together with my roommate, incredibly long Oldsmobile Toronado, 1970. It was $750 we paid for the car. But what we didn't realize, how much gas we had to buy, which we really could hardly. It was 8 cylinders. Yeah. I mean, my first musical that I went to on Broadway was King and I with Yul Brynner. You know, I knew that he spoke Russian. And naively, I thought, oh, maybe I should send him a little message. And I did send message backstage. So I'm also an émigré from Russia and everything. Never heard back from him, but that's fine. I saw him on stage. Also, I was lucky that literally less than 2 months after that, there was a competition. They had annual competitions for the best concerto interpreters who were allowed, if they wanted, they were playing with the Juilliard Orchestra in an open concert at Alice Tully Hall. One of my favorite pieces of music, which I was very much together with, was Prokofiev's First Violin Concerto, and that was the competition for that. So I played it, won that competition, and that was one of the most memorable successes I've ever had. My roommate, he was in the orchestra, in the second violins, I think, and I had this crazy idea. Just the night before, I thought, listen, what if we need to play an encore, a Mozart duo? I don't think it's original Mozart duo, but it was for 2 violins, but you'll be sitting down so they don't see you. But it would sound like a string quartet, because with chords and everything. I said, and we tried it and we memorized it. And the next day, I repeated the second movement, the fast presto of the Prokofiev one. And then we played this unexpected thing. And then when I brought him up, the hall just went nuts. And that was incredibly lucky, because there was no better way to announce myself to the school, to New York public. It was also my first public concert in more than a year and a half. Whoever was there, they still remember that concert. It was so unusual for this school concert. It was 1,000 people, totally full hall, great expectations. But, you know, of course, this Jerry Grossman, who was in New York Philharmonic, he came totally surprised to find that anonymous musician who approached him with the letter to all of a sudden he's in New York. But there were also others who I met later on, who's now in California. And I said, why didn't we meet at Juilliard? He said, are you kidding? He said, you were like Elvis Presley after this concert. You know, I became so popular and everybody wanted to play chamber music with me. You know, I could go out with all the pretty girls that were there. There were so many extraordinarily and exotic looking girls at Juilliard, but you had to learn how to approach them. You know, you have to learn how to make small talk, how to charm them. And of course, the boys were always boys, no matter whether it was America or Russia, but here was an open field. There were a lot of things going on, new friends and new people who were helping me. And it was the most wonderful time because I wouldn't just say it was because of Juilliard, but I mean, my sort of target was Juilliard School, but New York became my target. I even tried to play on the street. I just wanted to have that experience. And it was a big success among the taxi drivers on the 6th Avenue. First, we were kicked out from a church on the 5th Avenue. They didn't want us there, the police. But then we moved to 6th Avenue, and I played the entire Bach D minor partita in front of the taxi drivers. It was a big success, made some money. And then I think a week later, I went to the Bach competition in Washington. So there was a good tryout. New York was absolutely the freest, the most dangerous, maybe in some ways, most competitive, but also it envelops you completely. And I felt New York belonged to me just as much as to Nelson Rockefeller. Because at that time, New York was dirty, dangerous, lots of crime. You have to navigate with great attention. When my mother came a year and a half later, she was mugged in her second week in New York. And I told her 3 things which she didn't follow. I said, don't go in dark streets where there's nobody there. And she was visiting her friend. I said, don't carry any significant amount of cash. And she carried $100, which is probably all she had in terms of cash at that time. And if, God forbid, somebody's taking your purse, do not fight. And when this big guy grabbed her purse, she started cursing him in Russian and everything. So he dragged her on the pavement. She damaged her knees and was angry at her. In 2 years, I absorbed and became, if not American, but certainly a Western person, because it was such an extraordinary chance to be inside of it. And I was, of course, surprised by how quickly people become friendly and smile. In Russia, hardly anybody smiled except you among friends. But then, of course, I realized later on that how are you doesn't mean any interest in how you really are. Many Russians think, how are you? And they go into this deep, all the problems and this, and no, nobody wants to hear it. It's basically another form of saying hello. One of the earlier immigrants than me, poet Naum Karjavin, he called the whole class of Americans "howariushniki." Later on, of course, I got deeper into this, and I realized that a lot of Americans don't really have something without Russians just don't exist. In other words, the subtext. If this is the table, this is the table. In Russia, if anything but, there is something underneath the table, and then underneath that, and you didn't really mean that. Also in music, it's so unnatural to be literal, because music by its very nature is made of symbols, and it's not, what is the symphony about? It's not about anything. It's about what you think while it is being played. In Russia, the whole thing was, we're going to a place where there are no words, no propaganda. This is music. This is something that very rarely was censored, but at least this is the moment of uniting the souls. Very often we read, of course, between the lines, and Shostakovich or other composers, of course, always put things with double, triple meaning, disguising it. And we were there to perceive this silent process. In America, there was none of that. And they didn't have to. They lived in a different system. I understand. As I say, it's not their fault, but the clash was continuous. Every time, especially since I was music director in Greensboro for 20 years. So I would drive to this particular place in the parking lot, and there was always somebody who introduced himself. He was a very colorful man who said, "You're a conductor, maestro, but I'm also a conductor." He used to be a conductor of a subway in New York. And now he found himself in North Carolina. I adored him. He had these dreadlocks and was absolutely fantastic. But one day he wasn't there. So another parking attendant, lovely girl, so maybe in her 20s, said, "Oh, so what's your pass?" I said, no, this is my spot. I'm the conductor. "Oh, maestro, you're the maestro. Ah, I just love the way you talk." It was meant with all her heart. The most impressive thing that I was doing all these 20 years was the talks before the concert or sometimes in between the pieces. And this encapsulates the whole clash or the difference between the cultures. They needed an explanation when you leave that life with lots of qualities that you've developed, with your talent, with your knowledge, with great tradition, with your great language. That's all positive that you immigrate with. But at the same time, you also take away with you all those negative things. In the environment that I grew up, everybody was super professional and they were trained to be professionals. And the word amateur was almost a dirty word. You know, I always thought, oh, come on, this is not serious. I always wanted whoever I worked with, especially the orchestras or even in chamber music, it had to be at the very, very highest level, at the most professional. The teaching had to be and everything. Now, of course, having lived more than 2/3 of my life in the West, I realized that actually we need more amateurs. And being an amateur, there's nothing wrong about being an amateur. We need more amateurs because we need the audience. We have way too many professionals. That took a long time for me to change. The word refugee was always not too far. And my favorite story about this word comes from when I met my wife, Susan. I had a very good friend who I met actually at the Spoleto Festival in America, Christine Chizinski, our dear, dear, dear friend and godmother of my daughter later on. She was a terrific soprano. She sang, at that point at Salzburg. So I met her year 79. So Chris was very, very close friend with somebody who said, "Oh, you've got to meet my closest friend, Susan." So she lived in Krefeld, Germany, and Chris and I were driving from Saarbrücken. My destination was Hamburg because I was making a debut with the Hamburg radio, the famous NDR orchestra, and said, "Well, we'll make a stop at Susan's. I'll stay there, and you go on." Okay. And Susan was engaged to be married to another friend of theirs. So we came, and since she was for more than a year was talking about me, "Oh, Dima, this is great Russian refugee." So Susan had this image of this rather, pathetic-looking Russian refugee. And when she opened the door, in comes in completely different type, very sort of armed and dangerous, as it turned out. And she thought to herself, which became like a code word for our whole, not bad for a refugee. So she prepared a wonderful dinner. At dinner, I spent the night, and then I went to Hamburg. And I made a debut, but then on the way back, I already came back to her. And so the romance started very, very quickly. And before you knew, the engagement was off. And whenever I would do something really out of ordinary, and she would say, "Yeah, I'm not bad for a refugee." My recording producer, I did a number of recordings with him, and I would say, "Heinz, how was this take?" He would say in the speaker, so everybody, "Not bad for a refugee." I remember with the same Chris Chizinski when we came to Munich in 1980. I already had a car. That was my European car. I left it with a good friend in Munich. He was meeting us at Munich airport, and Chris needed to go to the rehearsal already in Salzburg Opera House. Now, Munich and Salzburg were very close. But at that time, they had the borders, of course. And Sasha, the one who had my car, met us, gave me the car keys. I let Chris drive. Everything was fine until we got to the border. And then he looked at my strange-looking refugee travel document. I didn't need a visa, thank God. But he asked, of course, for car papers. Car papers, I looked at the glove compartment. He forgot to put them. So we were practically 20 minutes from her home, from Salzburg. So what to do? Of course, that's the difference between the American mentality and the Russian refugee mentality. So I said, Chris, just drive slowly. And I'm just watching him being busy. I said, we're just looking for a U-turn. I said, you're not going to make me do that. I said, just listen to me. Just listen to me. We're looking for U-turn. We're looking, just go slowly. We're looking for U-turn. He's very, very busy. I said, now step on it. Boom. Pew. And we were in Austria. In 15 minutes, we were there. She nearly had a heart attack. I was as cool as a cucumber. It was a great sport for me. Beating the system, whether it's Salzburg border or Soviet Union, I love that. I always get a special rush in my blood when I beat the system. And we arrived there. She had palpitation, but she made her rehearsal. Everything's fine. I called my friend, said, you son of a bitch, send me and of course he mailed me the papers. A couple of days later, I went back. Fine. I don't know whether it's émigré or refugee mentality. This is just, you have to use your survival technique. Next time comes the story of my cousin Sasha. He's a musician as well, but unlike me, he stayed in Russia to pursue his dream of becoming a Soviet rock star. We went our separate ways until, inevitably, our paths crossed once more. I'm Dmitry Sitkovetsky, and you've been listening to Keeping the Flame, produced by Libo Libo Studio.